Hi guys, and welcome to Java, javac, and jars. We're going to go through compiling and running Java programs. We're going to go through building executable jars and running those in the command line, and building jar libraries and including those in our projects. So in reality, you'd use your code editor, Eclipse, IntelliJ, to do the builds for you and to run your programs for you, but it's still quite an interesting exercise to see how it works on the command line. And if you're doing something like the Java certification, this might be interesting. So we've got 4 projects to go through. The first one is we're going to compile and run Java programs, then we're going to build our executable jar and run that on the command line, and then in a 2-step project, we're going to build our jar and include that jar in our project. Okay, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code. You can use any editor that you wish, code editor, as long as you open up to the same directory as me, compile, run, and it should work fine. Okay, you can see I have 2 simple classes. You're going to see this repeating in the rest of our projects. So we have a main, which prints got it. We also have a dependency on class A, which is in a separate package. And class A just prints this is class A. So you can see that we'll be working through both packages. Okay. Interesting to note in Java, something called the class path, which is referenced from the root directory. And then you have your 2 packages, which is referenced in the files themselves, package A, package B. We'll see that again when we talk about class paths. Okay, so let's compile this first. Java program. So we're going to include both files, package A, class A, Java. So you have to use a Java file extension and package B. And you can also use a wildcard here to include all the Java files in that package. Okay, so when we run, we're going to build our .class files in place. It's interesting to note, actually, if I delete these, that you could actually omit class A because there's a dependency in package B on class A, it'll be imported automatically. Okay, so both class files are there. Now we're going to run this compile class. I should mention that Java, in the compilation step, builds bytecode, so that's what this class file is. It's the Java bytecode. Okay, and we see this is class A, got it. Okay, I like to actually put my classes in a separate folder so they're not sitting next to each other. So I'm going to run that command again, but this time I'm going to put them in the classes folder. Okay, so you can see how it reflects the same structure, folder structure. And now the change we have to make to the Java run command is we have to change class path, because we're no longer in the root directory, so these imports wouldn't make any sense. So we say, not up here, we don't. Down in the terminal, we say classes. Now you can see it's still working. Interestingly, if we change directory to classes, oh, I've kept that last bit on. And now we're in the directory of classes. We could run our first command without the class path because we changed our root directory. But it's still quite a powerful feature of being able to change class path. Okay, let's move on to project 2. So now we're going to build an executable jar. Okay, you can see here we've got the same structure, class B and class A, they're identical to before. And what we want to do is compile and then build our jar file. So we can actually use the same command that we had before. Javac classes. Okay, compile and run as before. It's still working. So now we want to build a jar file of this running program. And I always do CFE, create file entry point. So CFE. First of all, we use the jar name, first jar. Then we type in the entry point, which will be package B main class B, and then we type in the directory. Okay. But I have a sneaky suspicion because we moved. So let's just have a look at what we've just made. TF. So we can use this command to look inside the jar. We've made a package with classes and packages, which could be okay. But let's just make that again with just the classes. Okay, so we want to make that jar again with just the classes. Okay. And how we do that is we include the classes command, like as always, we use a flag capital C. Okay, let's have another look inside the jar, see what we have this time. Okay, we just have our class files. Interestingly, if I made a new folder test, you can actually open up the jar file. So let's cd into test, and we're going to run the command jar xf first jar. But we have to make sure we go backwards a directory first. Okay, and now we have filled in test with our jar. So we can see that when you make a jar, it makes a manifest.mf file, and this is our entry point, which we specified, and then you can see our classes. So I'll just delete test for now, but that's an interesting, that's insightful. Now let's run our jar. We're ready to run the jar. And for this, we're going to type in the command java -jar first. Oh, we're in the wrong folder. -jar first. And you can see we're working fine. So there we've just executed a jar on the command line. Okay. Now for the final project, we're not going to execute the jar, but we're going to make a library. So first of all, let's make that jar. Okay, so I've made a new class C. So all that does is print out, this is class C. Let's compile and turn it into a jar. So we know how to do that by now. Package C class C.java. Okay, and then let's make our jar. I'm just going to do jar.cfe class file execute second .jar. and so we're not going to have an entry point for this jar library. So we'll leave out the entry point, and the directory will just be the current directory. So we have a second jar, and let's just have a quick look into that jar, see that it's made correctly. So, yep, great. And we've included both the jar and the class in. Okay, doesn't matter. So we'll close that down. We've made our jar. I'm going to copy the jar, and I'm going to include it in our project. And I'm going to make a new folder, libs. Paste in the jar. Okay. Okay, so you can see how the only difference to this final project is class B now also relies on class C. That's the addition. You can see that we don't have a package C, but we do have obviously our second jar. So if we try to run javac, let's say package B, what would happen? Can't find class C. Okay, so how do we include that? So what we have to do is actually include the class path command on the javac when you're working with okay, what's single quotes there? Double quotes. And what you do is you do your current directory, semicolon, and then the directory of your jar. This is adding the jar to your class path. Slash second jar. Okay. On a Mac or Linux, instead of doing semicolon, you do normal colon. That's just one thing to remember. Okay, and then we still want to do our classes file, which we usually do. Okay, so you can see our classes file, which has package A and package B. Don't worry about the warnings, by the way. That's just from Visual Studio Code. Doesn't actually affect how we're running this on the command line. But I'll come around. We'll fix that at the end. So now we want to run our compiled code, and we do. How would we usually do it? Java-jar. Nope. We would do Java package. We'd use our entry point package B. Class B. Let's see if that runs. Could not find class not found exception because we have used for a jar we have to specify the class path again. Okay, and this time we have to do classes because that's where our compile code is. And we do semicolon, and then we do libs, second jar. Okay, and we get our running code, including this is class C, which is interesting because it's still saying there is an error. So let's just see if we can fix that in Visual Studio Code. So what you do is you go to Java projects, reference libraries, libs, and you'd include your jar in this VS Code settings.json. So you can manually create these folders and files, or you can go down here if it's in your Visual Studio Code editor. Alternatively, you could do files, preferences, settings, typing references in the search. You should have Java, the same key here, and you just have to paste this in here instead. Okay. But thank you very much, guys. That's the tutorial. I hope you've learned a lot about jars and executable jars and how to include jars in your projects. All the best.